Katie from Nerd Church here, and I'm going to be talking about a topic that's a little bit difficult for me to talk about. Um, because I'm going to be talking about Crusade Apologists. And I'm someone who doesn't have a lot of personal sympathy or a lot of respect for the motives of most of the people who went on the Crusades. Um, it was it was about it, it it was Europe's first colonialist adventure in a lot of ways. And there was some bad stuff that went down. Like the sack of Constantinople is a really big one. We can talk about, for example, the way that a lot of crusaders would start marching and they would decide to, practice on the Jewish population of any city that they came to. And it was just not, it was not good. It was not good. And when I first ran across people who were actually like defending the Crusades, my initial response as a human being, as a Catholic, and as a scholar was to just flip my lid, because I was like, this is some brand new version of neo-Nazi stuff that is specifically designed to be catnip for young Catholic men. And I still believe that, and I will stand by that statement. But I'm also going to explain why it works. I'm going to explain what the appeal is, not because I'm trying to make excuses for Crusade apologists, but because I think that if we're going to combat it, we need to understand what's going on and why. Okay. Basically, the elephant in the room is the fact that if you are an American under the age of 25, there has always been a war somewhere in the Middle East. The children, the children of the people who were initially deployed in Afghanistan are the people who are fighting in Iran. And they could very well be the grandchildren of people who were in the National Guard and got called up and sent to Iraq to defend Kuwait in the first Gulf War. And that's what's going on. When they hear the First Crusade, they're equating that in their little pea brains to the first Gulf War. Because the first Gulf War was fought to liberate Kuwait. The First Crusade, ostensibly, this is the historical narrative, the First Crusade was designed to protect Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. Why does that sound credible to somebody living in 2026? Because in 2026, people are very well aware of the fact, especially if you're Catholic, that there is and always has been a population of Palestinian Christians. In many cases, these are people who converted as soon as it was possible to be a Christian, they converted. Like, there is a tattoo shop in the Holy Land run by Coptic Christians that has been verifiably putting ink on pilgrims since the 1300s, which is very cool. right? Like, getting a Razuk tattoo is like bucket list level for most people. And that's the point, is that if you're Catholic or if you're Orthodox, you are very well aware of the fact that there is a Christian population in Palestine. And if you're Catholic, you're really aware of the fact that there's a Catholic population centered around Holy Family Church who have gotten shelled. I mean, we all know that Pope Francis, like practically until the end, as long as that man had breath in his body, like, he was, his last actual phone call was on Holy Saturday, and the man died Easter Monday, right? He was calling Holy Family Church in Gaza, just to check in on them, to make sure they were okay, to try to get them humanitarian supplies. So it's very, very easy to convince a young man who is aware that sometimes going to fight in the Middle East is something that you're going to get asked to do, that maybe one time, way back, really, really far in the past, there was a situation where medieval Europeans found themselves in a similar position and made the same choice that their dad or their grandpa or their older brother or they made in the first Gulf War, which was to go and fight in defense of people who needed defending. The problem is that this is a narrative that is kind of based on a lot of vibes and weird analogies and things like that. And it's also something that's incredibly easy to co-opt by, like, people like Pete Hegseth, who will put a Jerusalem cross on them and say Deus Vult, even though Pete Hegseth is someone who belongs to a church that literally believes that something like a Corpus Christi procession should be forbidden, who thinks that Catholic churches shouldn't be allowed to ring their bells so that everybody within earshot knows that, you've got about 10 minutes to hurry to the church because it's time for Mass, right? Pete Hegseth doesn't think that Catholics are really Christian, but he will slap a Jerusalem cross on his chest and he will get Deus Vult tattooed on his arm and ruin those symbols for the people who actually have a right to use those symbols, and try to turn it into an excuse for anti-Islamic hatred. And, well, you can always dig up anti-Semitism, right? Like, that is just floating in the atmosphere in any Christian majority country, and that's just a fact, and that's unfortunate. But that's how they're doing it. That's how they're radicalizing them. They're convincing them that the first crusade was righteous, therefore all the rest of the crusades were righteous, therefore any kind of adventurism in the Middle East is righteous. It's a trick. It's a shell game. And it's something that we need to argue against. But it's something that we need to argue against carefully and subtly, understanding where the fault lines are and understanding where the analogy is, and finding out what the story is that these Crusade apologists are carrying around in their heads. Because yes, someone who is okay with with the sack of Constantinople, that person is irredeemable. Or rather, they're irredeemable without, like, a direct, like, divine intervention, God softening their hearts, kind of changing their mind, right? A human being cannot do it. But a First Crusade apologist, someone who's willing to concede that the sack of Constantinople was not okay, but feels like, if there's pilgrims in the Holy Land who are getting hassled, somebody needs to come in and take a stand in favor of religious freedom. That is someone who can be reached and can be reasoned with. And maybe there's some hope. I don't know. All I know is that I think I figured out what's going on in their heads, and maybe it's something that we ought to try. I don't know. Nerd Church out.